Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So whether you have a book in your head or a manuscript all ready to go, or even 300 sheets of loose leaf shoved in a drawer, and yes, we get envelopes of loose leaf all the time, visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by three authors who have absolutely unleashed themselves. Tanaya Kollipara is the author of Stigma, Breaking the Asian American Silence on Mental Health. And we're so thrilled to have Tanaya piping in today from California. Ellis Goodman, the author of Bookends, Short Stories from a Long Life. I'm a huge short story fan, maybe that short attention span, and you're going to be dazzled and thrilled to meet Ellis, who is hailing today from Chicago. And Debbie Roppolo is the author of If a Chicken Could Stop. You could tell from the cover that you're going to love meeting Debbie and hearing all about this fun book about chickens. Debbie is hailing from Texas today. I'm guessing she has a lot more experience with chickens than I do from New York City. So first, our first guest, Tanaya Kollipara, and she writes of Stigma. Suicide is the leading cause of death among Asian Americans ages 15 to 24. But most would never guess this due to the mainstream representations, which portray Asian American and Pacific Islander groups as model minorities in health, wealth, and mannerisms. In Stigma, Breaking the Asian American Silence on Mental Health is both a narrative account and an informative look into the world of AAPI mental health. Please welcome Tanaya, and thank you so much for joining us. What an important topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I was just reading your description and saying, am I glad you're talking about this and writing about this? So
yes,
the book. Tell me a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So hello, everyone. I'm Tanaya. I am a current student at UC Berkeley. So I'm going to college, still in college. Yay! And I work at a nonprofit part-time as well. And essentially, I've been a student all my life, and I've had a very intimate look at mental health and mental illness, especially in the past few years where my family and I moved to a predominantly first-generation immigrant town. And I really saw the stigmas and how it affected my family, my friends, and a lot of my loved ones. And after seeing it year after year, seeing individuals be affected by the stigma, unable to seek out help and resources for their mental illness or for their mental health struggles, I wanted to essentially do what I could to break that stigma. And in high school, I created a club called NAMI, a campus chapter at my high school. And I didn't really make as much change as I really wanted to, because stigma is always really hard to break. It's a mindset that's been ingrained for generations, really. So that's why when I realized that storytelling is a really important way to help people understand, I went on this journey to interview and talk with people from my family to my friends to strangers that I've never even met who are across the country, about their experiences, so that way I could break that silence and hopefully bring a little bit of change and empathy in the community at large. But yes, that's a little bit about me, and I know I went a little bit into my book as well, but
right. First of all, I am just so appreciative, besides your specifics about Asian Americans and specific groups, that mental health is now part of the discussion. And I see that in so many ways, and I am so thrilled that for all groups and for all ages, that people are not hiding mental health issues. This is huge. And I'm sure, I mean, you're young, but this is a huge change from, not even just 25 years ago, but even 5 years ago. This is a huge change.
I 100% agree. Looking at the kind of mental health awareness and education I had in elementary, I have a younger sister actually, and seeing what she's being taught at schools and like hearing about around her through social media and just society and everyday conversation, you can see the change. It's very stark, but it's also in a very good direction. I'm super happy how we're starting to become more aware about it and starting to realize the importance of it. It's just as important as our physical health, and seeing like everyone finally recognizing that, it makes me super happy. So I just was hoping to contribute to the conversation from an identity that I could relate to for sure.
That's fantastic. You know, for all people, that people are open, even people in my inner circle who now will call to talk about things. And you know that just a few years back, everyone was just hush hush about things. It's a
Exactly.
big difference. It really.
You told us to jump in, so I'm jumping in here.
Please do.
I've had, because I am old and you saw short stories from a long life, but I have had experience of dealing with both Japanese and Chinese, particularly Chinese from a business prospect, but also from the fact that I was an executive producer of a documentary drama called Mulberry Child, which is about the life of a young Chinese woman who grew up during the Cultural Revolution, is now living in the States with her American-raised daughter, and that's what the movie was about. It won many awards and was on PBS for 3 years running. So I know a bit about the Chinese mentality, and it's always been a challenge for me to really understand, to get through, because the Chinese and the Japanese are the same. There is this shield that it always appears that people put up. And so you never really know their feelings. There's politeness and there is charm, and you think everything is wonderful. And this sort of shield comes down, and it's hard to know what's going on in their heads. And I think that puts tremendous stress on them, particularly when you've transferred from another culture into the US, you know, with all its foibles and difficulties. And so the children of immigrants who come in here are faced with the fact that they are American, they become American, or they are American, they're born here, whatever, and they have to fold into the American culture because that's what they want to do. And yet they've still got the influence of their Chinese, Japanese families, whatever it is, teaching them all those connections that are so important to their family backgrounds. And it's very hard for them, I think, to flourish in the two cultures. And that, I think, is what probably causes a lot of stress and maybe mental problems. And maybe Tanaya can comment on that.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. No, that is 100% accurate in the fact that there's this shield. Even growing up, so my parents immigrated here like about 25 years ago or so, and I was born here, so I definitely do see that two world culture. And there's this expectation, and it's very, very subtle. You don't even realize you've learned it until, you know, now years later, as I really went into the mental health field, that, oh, I was unintentionally putting up that wall of stoicism, putting up that persona of perfection, that everything is all right inside of me and that I cannot present that I'm struggling in any way, shape, or form. Because it's learned behavior. You see your parents model that kind of behavior. You see your extended family, your relatives, the community around you. If you live in a mainly Asian populated area, you see a lot of them keeping that same kind of shield and hiding all these things, not just mental health. It's basically anything that they think could make them be perceived as not perfect. They'll try to keep it to themselves, keep it within their family, and there's that shame and stigma around it. And because of that, they don't seek help because they're afraid of someone finding out. And a lot of the individuals that I interviewed for my book, some of them immigrated recently, some of them around my age, but there's always this common thread that we don't want others to find out that we're struggling. The family doesn't want others to find out that they're struggling because they believe that if others find out that they will be shunned. And unfortunately, it actually has happened in the past. An individual that I had interviewed had kept her her struggles with, no, you're totally good. Her struggles with depression secret because she had seen a friend of hers who had finally opened up to the community to try to get that support, immediately shun her and her family, because there's this ideal of collectivism where if one individual is affected with something, it's associated with the entire family. So they would stop being invited to events. Parents would tell their children, don't hang out with that child, thinking it's something that's contagious, which is obviously very false. And so it becomes a learned behavior and people hide behind that wall. So yes, what you said was spot on, Ellis.
Did you have any pushback from your parents or the older generation in even writing this book or doing the research for this book? Did you find that in any way?
So for my parents, thankfully, they were super supportive because before I wrote this book, like I was saying, in high school, I got involved in mental health advocacy, and that kind of helped them to become more familiar with it and become more accustomed to it. But definitely my extended relatives, my extended family who don't have that same intimacy with mental health awareness because they don't live in the US, right? And for them, they were excited, like, wow, she's writing a book. That's so great. But then once I told them what it was about, they're like, oh, okay, yeah. And then they don't want to talk about it because it's such a taboo topic that they want to shove it aside and pretend it doesn't exist. So I'm so thankful. My parents and my friends, they've all been super supportive and super receptive to the writing of the book. But definitely I see in my extended family and even some parents in the community, because right now my hometown is a very high population of first generation immigrants, Asian immigrants, that they're a little hesitant. They're a little bit unsure and kind of scared, and they have questions though. I'm really happy that for those who've come to me, they've come with questions that they want to understand a little bit more. So I think already just in writing the book that I've started to slowly open up conversation as well.
Fantastic. That was going to be my next question, was tell me about some impact you've seen from the book, whether it's an older person who's reading it and gaining more understanding, or a younger person who's reading it and feeling like, oh, thank goodness, this is me and I'm understood. Tell me about some of that impact.
Yeah, so my book will be officially released on August 30th. So we still have a couple of days before it goes out into the big bad world. But for beta readers, thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate it. But for the beta readers who read it, and I purposely chose beta readers who I knew might have not been really familiar with mental health and mental illness, but were willing to learn about it. And I chose more like parents as well as a couple of kids like around my age, individuals and students, because I want, essentially that's like the audience that I'm going for. Even if you don't share the Asian American identity, that's why I also have like former teachers and professors also be part of my beta reader community, because I want mental health, like you were saying earlier, Stephanie, that mental health is related to everyone. So even if these stories are centering around Asian American voices, it is still going to have some themes that are still very relevant to the general population, because although we're having great progress with how mental health and mental illness is seen in a society, there is obviously, it's slow. We still see like the older generation, no offense to all the individuals in this room, slow on the uptake. They are a little hesitant, and it's hard when you've been taught one thing for years and years, decades even. It's hard to suddenly change it and let it go. I know in 20 years down the line, there will be some sort of viewpoint that I wouldn't have learned, and it'll be hard for me to let go what I've learned. But all the individuals, sorry, I digressed a little bit, but all the individuals who, my beta readers, they said the stories, because my book centers around the stories, helped them understand that it isn't necessarily the scary foreign thing, because everyone hides it, so no one knows what it actually is. What does it actually mean to live with mental illness? What does it actually mean to struggle with your mental health? They might have experienced it themselves, but they don't have a name to it. So I had some adults, and actually in one of my beta readers said to me, I didn't realize that what I had been going through was related to mental health and mental illness. And she actually said she's going to go see her doctor about it and potentially seek a therapist, which was amazing. I literally cried a little bit when I heard about it, because that's exactly what I wanted my book to do. And seeing it happen like that was absolutely amazing. And again, younger individuals felt really validated that they're not alone in their struggles. So exactly, there's definitely already been a little bit of impact, and I can't wait for the rest of the world.
We're still a week away from the actual launch, and the book is already changing lives. I think that that is just amazing. So you hear that, everybody? A week out, and we're changing lives already. That's just amazing.
Wonderful. And I have to congratulate Tanaya, because she's very young and she's writing this book, which is getting published. Congratulations.
Yes.
And is able to observe this serious issue in written form with a lot of knowledge from her own experiences, despite her young years. So I'm sure you're going to have great success at Berkeley and in the future. So good luck.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and congratulations. Our next author is Ellis Goodman, who wrote Bookends, Short Stories from a Long Life, a collection of 10 international stories covering a period of 60 years from the mid-20th century that explore human behavior in the face of remarkably unexpected circumstances. The subjects of each story find themselves faced with obstacles ranging from bearing witness to murder to the complications of greed and class superiority.
Wow.
So thank you for joining us, Ellis Goodman.
Well, thank you for having me. That's very nice of you.
Absolutely. And you know, as Tanaya was saying, it's through stories, whether they are true stories or fiction. Quite frankly, both sides of that coin help people to understand themselves and see themselves. Now, we're hoping that your murder stories are not personally from your life, but I'm so delighted that you wrote in narrative. So tell us a little bit about your life and where you're gaining all these stories. And I hear a fabulous accent there too.
Well, I'm English, and I've had various careers from being a public accountant. I'm a chartered accountant by profession, to being in the beverage alcohol industry for 38 years. I'm the guy that brought Corona beer to the United States, for instance, part of my fame and fortune. And also I'm in the real estate business, and I've written, this is my 4th published book. And this one is different. It's the other ones were, 2 of them were espionage, and the other one was a marketing book about Corona beer. This is a book of short stories which is looking at human behavior, because it, you know, as we go through life, we see reaction in human behavior to circumstances that crop up and are unexpected. Some of them are tragic, some of them are funny. All fiction, to my mind, is based on fact, or part of it, but is based on fact. And so these stories take into account upsets that come along to people, or opportunities that come along to people, and how they react. Life can be very calm, and then chaos can ensue when something unexpected crops up. So I have stories that involve, for instance, a love story which involves a boy meeting a girl, which is quite usual, many years ago on the beaches of an Italian resort. If you believe in love at first sight, it was love at first sight. But she's there with her boyfriend. And so there's no hope of him really doing much about that until he sees her at one of the dance bars in the evening, a few days later, like a week or so later, and he decides he's going to ask her to dance, come what may, because he's fascinated by the beauty and the charm of this young lady who waves to him from time to time. So he knows that she knows he's there. And it turns out it's not her boyfriend, it's her brother that she's with, because in the 60s, you had to have a chaperone anywhere you went in Italy. So he's so excited, but then she's leaving. She leaves the next day. And so he has the challenge, the obstacle of trying to keep in touch, and whether this would lead to anything wonderful or not, or how it would change his life. And that's what the story is about. Sometimes you live happily ever after, and sometimes you don't. And another story, which is quite terrifying really, is that a young honeymoon couple, ideal in every way. They're beautiful. They come from Winnetka, which is just down the road from where I live in Chicago. Beautiful, talented, very capable, very wonderful people. They met in college at Northwestern University and Kellogg, and they go off on honeymoon. And on the last day of their honeymoon, which they're in Turkey, in Istanbul in Turkey, they check out of their hotel. He loads up the cab with all the baggage. He's ready to go to the airport, and he realizes he's left his passport and the tickets on the checkout counter, the reception in the desk. So he says, hold on, I'm going to run in. He runs in, he comes back, and the taxi's gone. So there he is, he's standing there, the cab's gone, and he says to the doorman, where's the cab gone? He says, I don't know, sir. You told me you wanted to go to the airport. I told the driver of the airport, and the cab's gone. So there are thousands of yellow cabs. This, incidentally, all these stories are before cell phones. So that makes a big difference to our lives. So he has the problem of finding out what he's got a new wife. He's on the last day of his honeymoon, and this seems crazy. She's just disappeared. And there's a whole thing about guilt and a careless mistake, what it can do to you and what it can do to other people's lives. So that as that story unfolds, there's a lot of history there, but there's also a lot of horror. And those are the sort of stories I'm writing in this 10-story book. And I hope it's easy reading. I'm getting some very nice feedback. This has been launched with the help of Stephanie and her team. And I'm getting some nice feedback on Facebook and from my other contacts. I had a launch party about 2 weeks ago, nearly 2 weeks ago, and that went quite well. So I think it's easy summer reading, and it's enjoyable for me to write these stories, most of which I've had a connection with one way or another. Not the honeymoon in Istanbul, I should say.
Well, absolutely great beach reading. And I loved the way you said, Ellis, that it's about that moment between calm and chaos. And sometimes that's the blink of an eye, isn't it? That moment between calm and chaos, the entire world can pivot in just an instance. And that's what you're thinking about. Short stories are great summer reads. You know, so many people have the attention span of a fly nowadays, especially especially when one is enjoying a beach read. You know, this way, if something attractive comes down the beach, you can put down your book. So we always say that that's a great thing. But like you said about human nature, you know, it's interesting. Tanaya is writing about actual human nature from, you know, that perspective of people's stories. You're fictionalized, and yet humans are just such complex creatures, aren't we? You know, and that's how what we see, and especially in that story you just described of the honeymoon couple. And I don't want to give away spoilers because I know where it ends, but what we see, and this is kind of what Tanaya was saying in her book, what we see is not necessarily what is true.
Right.
And that goes with so many things. And I think that goes with, you know, I say about people, you never know what's right under the surface of anyone.
Well, we also say we never know what goes on behind closed doors.
Exactly. And you think you know somebody, but that's what your short stories are. Your short stories are what is going on behind closed doors, or behind the eyeballs, shall we say, which is just fabulous. So you've had quite the storied career in publishing. Now we're going from Corona beer to the common chaos. So hey, I love it. I love it. It's such.
And I had a couple of espionage books in between.
Ooh.
One of which I'm hopeful will get made into a movie or a TV series.
I love that.
About that, yeah.
Well, you hear that, all the directors out there? We've got some espionage here too. But there's one thing that I don't think that you have written yet. And you've written Corona beer, you've written, you know, espionage, you've written from calm to chaos, but I don't think you have written comedy. And our next author today, Debbie Roppolo, has written If a Chicken Could Shop. If chickens could shop, would they buy a cute top? Perhaps they'd be content with a broom or a mop. Step into imagination and take a shopping trip with a chicken. Learn interesting facts as your imagination strolls through the pages of the book and wonder, what if a chicken could shop? Well, I'm so delighted, Debbie, that you're joining us. And I have to say, I just came back from a short trip to Hawaii, and the place was littered with chickens. So when I saw your book, I had no idea that Hawaii had chickens walking around in the street. So,
I didn't either.
and roosters that wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So anyone who has not been to Hawaii yet, it's not what you think. It's beautiful in its beaches, but there's chickens that are walking around in the streets. So,
I never would have imagined. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. But chickens in Hawaii,
chickens in
I never would have imagined.
So you're in Texas. Is that where you get your firsthand knowledge of chickens from?
Well, actually, I do. As you can tell from my accent, I am a Texan, born and raised. Sometimes my accent gets in the way. I'm a little bit hard to understand, but I get by.
I love it.
Every once in a while. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I have a little bit of a different career story. Of all things, I didn't start out wanting to write a book. I mean, how many of us, I know there are a lot of people, a majority of the people who say have a book inside of us. I was one of the few who didn't. I thought as a child, I said, I love to read, but I don't think I have enough patience to sit down and actually write a book. But I had this wild imagination, and I had all kinds of adventures, and a lot of it was with chickens. I grew up in the country. Of all things, I know my children are going to see this and think, "Oh, Mom, I can't believe you said that." Of all things, I would have tea parties with chickens. You've heard of the dish? I did. It was so much fun. I mean, I actually had the little teacups sitting around, and you've heard of the dish. Another thing, you've heard of the dish, chicken and dressing. I took it to a whole new level because I would put clothes on my.
Oh my!
Wow.
Wow!
Yeah, they would. So I had this great and wonderful imagination, and all through my life, I would invent little short stories that I would share with my friends. And even in college, I would write my term papers, and my professors would say, no, 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 no. My major was kinesiology with a minor in anthropology.
Wow.
And at the time, I was a police officer.
Okay.
Going to school too. So that's way away from what I do now. But a lot of people said, no, you need to write a book with that imagination. Oh, no, I don't have the patience to do that. But unfortunately, about 20 years ago, I was in a near fatal car accident.
Ooh.
And I lost the ability to completely use my right arm. I do have about 90% of it now. But I had to rethink my career goals. And I began writing again, and had my first story published with Chicken Soup for the Dog Lover Soul.
Nice.
Thanks. And I began my writing career, and my first book was a children's book, Amelia Frumpeter Peanut Butter Loving Overactive Imagination. And then I'm really I'm sure you and I and some other people can identify with this. I'm sure you remember Irma Bombeck.
Oh, of course.
I loved her writings, and I've always tried to see the humor in things. So my next book was The Toilet's Overflowing and the Dog is Wearing My Underwear. A collection of Irma Bombeck type stories about my children. And I'm sure my son is in the next room saying, oh man, don't go into those stories now, Mom. I'm not ready for this. But If a Chicken Could Shop is about my third children's book, my fifth children's book. And actually it's based on a conversation with my son. It was during COVID. We had chickens that we're raising in our backyard, and it was raining, and we had to go buy chicken food. And I'm standing at the door, and I'm watching the rain pour down. And I said, oh, wow, I wish chickens could shop. thought, wait, what if a chicken could shop? And my wild imagination took over, and that's whenever the book was born.
All right. I love that story. And thrilled, by the way, to hear about your life journey. You know, talk about having to make a major pivot. Thank goodness you're here and alive.
Thank you.
And 90% use of your arm, that's just huge progress. Unbelievable.
Thank you.
But to find something,
Well,
that's just amazing.
Well, thank you so much. And I enjoyed writing it. And I put the chickens in the role of what we do. We go out and shop. And I thought, well, let's make it a little bit more educational too. So I would pose a question at some point in the book of, you know, what would a chicken eat? What would they look for? And at the end, I go on to say, talk about the uses of that we do have for chickens and some facts about chickens that a lot of people didn't even know. For example, it's a descendant of the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh, look at that. Who knew?
I did not know, not at all.
I didn't either. That was recently discovered by scientists. It is the only living relative of the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Wow. So when I was in Hawaii and there were chickens walking all over, it was really little dinosaurs walking all over the road.
Right.
Who knew?
Right. Right. And it's just to me, it's to me they're a little bit unappreciated. We have the term in society as well, you're a chicken. Don't be a chicken. Has anyone ever encountered a chicken? Those things will tear you up.
Right. So they're not scared. They're not scaredy cats.
No, ma'am. No.
No, I must say the ones I encountered were not afraid of me at all. I was the one who walked around to avoid them because they were holding their ground. You're absolutely right. So what's going to be the next animal featured? If this was the book about chickens, are we going to, are goats next?
Well, and I did pose the question at the end of the book, what if a goat could sail a boat?
Oh, okay.
So, who knows what's in the next book? And I'm having more and more of adventures with my children. So quite possibly another Irma Bombeck type book is in the making. And
love it.
But I'm loving hearing about the books today. Most definitely, there's needs to be more awareness for mental health, and I really am quite appreciative.
Thank you. And
I'm
three completely different types of books here. Very, very different. And I'm sure completely different ways of going about writing the books. So from the three of you, tell me a little bit about the hardest thing when you were writing. I'm sure there were things that were much harder than you expected, and maybe something that went much smoother than you thought it would be. Tanaya, how about you? Were there any things that were like, wow, I was rougher than I thought to get people to talk to me? Or maybe that was easy. Maybe they talked to you too much and you had too much paperwork on that. How did that go?
Yes, actually, when I first started on the writing journey, I thought finding individuals to share their story would be very difficult. And it ended up being the absolute opposite. Actually, when I made the announcement that I was writing a book, a lot of people reached out to me wanting to share their stories. So it was just a matter of people didn't really know where was a safe space they could go and share their stories. So a lot of people were very much willing to talk about it. And when I reached out to individuals, they were very willing to talk about it. But the difficult part was actually more so the revisions, getting it all out, translating the interviews into the stories, adding in research. The first draft, it was fine. It was fun. But when I went back I just looked at the book. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a whole load of a lot of wordy mess. Now I need to go in and take things out, but then you find it difficult to part from some words and from some paragraphs because you feel like everything you wrote is essential, but in reality, it actually isn't. And it's just going to make your book kind of hard to follow. So for me, it was definitely the revisions phase of the book writing process that was very difficult for me. I would agonize over one paragraph for an entire day or two, trying to make the sentence sound right or see if I actually even needed it, and go back to my interviews and see if I captured their voices and their stories properly. So it's definitely the revisions part for me. I don't know about you, Ellis and Debbie, if the revisions are equally as difficult.
Tanaya, it sounds to me like your book made an impact on people even before it was written, because people were so happy to have a safe place to talk. And that's huge. Like, even before your book was a Word doc, it was already making a difference in people's lives. And I think that that's just awesome. So I can't thank you enough for taking on such a tough topic. That's great. Ellis, how about you? What was hard for you? Was narrowing down the stories hard? Was even, I always think short stories are not easy. Sometimes, like Tanaya was saying about editing, short stories are all about editing because you want to kind of firm things up. And
that's right. And Tanaya's right, because all the books that I've written have been a struggle in terms of revising and editing and rewriting and editing and rewriting it, because you have to learn to get rid of your little darlings. You've created some characters, you thought, oh, these are really beautiful, and oh, I've described this perfectly, and then you're feeling quite happy, and about a few days later, while you think about it, think, what the hell did I put that in for? It's totally irrelevant to the story. And so you think, oh dear, I got to cut out another little darling. So it's about trying to get it compact and keeping the story moving, I think, is the hardest thing. And I'm not sure, I think short stories have an advantage in that they are short, so you don't have an ongoing narrative that goes on and on and on and on. But then you have to think, how do I end it? I mean, does everything have to have a happy ending? Or I like to think that I end the stories and many stories in that you have to think your own ending, like you want to know what happened afterwards. And you have to decide, well, you think what happened afterwards. I don't know what happened afterwards. I didn't write that bit, I just got it to a certain stage, and then you decide where it goes from here. So the hardest thing is the revisions and the editing and rewriting and rewriting and rereading it until you're fed up with it. So I think that's just part of writing, Tanaya, and expect it in all your future books.
I will. It was a shocker to me the first time, but now I understand.
And I'm sure that there will be more books, Tanaya. I have no doubt about that.
Yes. Already I have some ideas in my head, so I am hopeful for another one.
Fantastic. Ellis, was there anything easy about this book process? Like, did the selection of which stories go more smoothly, or the title, or anything?
Well, there are, I think you would know this better than I do, but people write in a different way. Some people like to write longhand on yellow pads, and they go on and on forever writing that out and getting it all down, which I really admire them. Other people use their computers and they're typing it up, and then they're editing and writing and changing it. And I dictate. I've never learned how to type. My typing is one. I'd be 105 years old before I finished anything. So I talk, and so I'm at the mercy of the computer's dictation system.
Gotcha.
But what I do is, Tanaya was saying she's thinking out her stories, and I think out a lot. In the night, I think it out. Things come to me, and I start thinking out the story and the characters and what they're saying to each other. And to me, it's like watching a movie in my head, and then I try and translate that into words by talking to my computer and hoping it types up correctly what I'm saying. So it's a different process.
Debbie,
have you ever?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ellis, have you ever actually talked out a conversation between your characters, like out loud? Because that's something I find myself doing sometimes.
I do that. And that's when I've often come across, I'd never say that. Nobody would have said that. I thought that sounds good until you say it out loud and you think that doesn't sound right. So you have to revise it. So you want the stories, to me, they want to got to be credible. I like to put a lot of factual information in there so people can perhaps identify with locations and people they know, things like that. And that's what I like to put into a story. And I enjoy the process. I really do enjoy the process. So on Stephanie's suggestion, I'm now working in my head. I'm ready to get going on a new book, or it might be a novella, because you told me novellas are something that people like as well, like a shorter book. So I'm working on that. I've got that in my head. And that's going to be all around about Indian plantations, tea plantations, which I'm sure you know a lot about. I know absolutely nothing about it. I've come across this story in my head, and I'm working on that.
That's the fun of research. Debbie, how about your book? Did anything go easier or more difficult than you imagined? Did you have your house full of chickens and you could just write and look around?
No, I don't keep chickens in the house now. Since I'm older, they stay out in the backyard. But actually, in all seriousness, time was an issue for me a little bit. I do editing for another publishing company.
Okay.
And so I would have books that I had to edit during the day. And then it was just, sometimes I would edit whenever I was at home at night. And you know how that goes. And it was just finding time to do it. And all my other children's books that I've written have been more like a Beverly Cleary style, like the Ramona character. So they were not a rhyming book like this one. And just making the words blend together and flow naturally. And just like Bill, I hope I got your name right. Or Ellis, I'm sorry.
Ellis.
I apologize, Ellis. I'm terrible at names sometimes. But I would talk the book out loud and go back, and that doesn't sound right. That word sounds too advanced for my age group that I have. So of course I would have to go back and change it and make sure that it fit the age group that I was going for. Right. But that, and making it, even though it's imagination, making it somewhat believable, if that makes any sense.
Nope, that makes total sense to me. Absolutely. And that's why I love, we have so many people out there who are viewers who are writers, and for them to hear exactly what goes into it, because we're all going to hit those spots that, like Ellis said, the calm and the chaos are just a breath away when we're writing, and we're going to hit roadblocks, and things are going to be easy, and then things are going to be tough. But the three of you did it, and I hear rumblings that you all have plans to do it again. Now, Ellis is working on some stuff. Tanaya, you said you've got something that you're thinking about. What is your next thing going to be? Do you have any, can you give it away yet or not yet?
I can give a couple little hints. It's still very much in the works. But essentially, my first love has always been fiction books. I grew up just immersing myself in fiction worlds. So I really want to branch away from the creative nonfiction world and really tap into my, creative fiction side. So I am right now thinking of writing a realistic fiction book, essentially following a individual's journey as an Asian American. So I still want to explore the Asian American identity very much so, because I can relate to it a lot. But kind of have a fiction novel kind of like that. So a lot of things still in the works, but that's just the rough idea.
Fantastic. And I know that Debbie ended her book about asking about the goat on the boat. So we are definitely hoping. Is that
well, thank you. That, of course, that will be for the younger readers, but also what I'm thinking about doing. I do enjoy writing for older children, and I've had somewhat of an interesting life. So I'm thinking about creating a character who is having a journey similar to mine. She loses her father whenever she's 16 years of age, and dealing with that and finding lost family and just going from there.
Okay. Okay, well, I
See
ask
you.
all three of you, when the next book comes out, please contact me so we can join you back here on Between the Covers. And I just want to remind our viewers of your book so that you can go out there and grab a copy. Stigma, Breaking the Asian American Silence on Mental Health. It's coming soon, very soon, but I hear it's flying off the shelves already. So grab a copy. And I'm sure if you go over here to tanayawrites.com, you can make sure to keep up on everything with that. Bookends, short stories from a long life, is already available. So you can grab a copy of that while we still have some hot summer days, reading by the beach, wherever you might be, you'll want to grab that. And if a chicken could shop, whether you, like me and Debbie, have been with chickens in person or not lucky enough to be with chickens in person, you'll definitely want to grab a copy of If a Chicken Could Shop. And there's some of her links as well. And I'm so thrilled to have all three of you on the show. Please come back with book number 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever it may be. And thanks for inspiring all of our readers and writers out there. And happy writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks for joining us on Between the Covers. I hope you enjoyed the show.